7:11 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. The house felt quieter than it should have. I woke before the alarm, not because I needed to be anywhere, but because my body learned long ago that mornings were safest when you arrived before anyone asked something of you. The ceiling fan hummed softly above me, steady, indifferent. I lay still, listening. No footsteps in the hallway. No kettle already boiling. No familiar voice calling my name from the other room, the way it used to years ago when mornings were shared instead of managed. It's fine, I told myself. It's still early. The light coming through the curtains was pale and careful, almost apologetic. It rested on the walls as if it didn't want to disturb me. I swung my legs out of bed and felt the cool floor ground me. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on the stove. The click of the burner echoed too sharply in the silence. Today was my birthday. I had circled the date on the calendar weeks ago, not out of excitement, but habit. 76. I didn't expect much, just a call, maybe a visit later, something small that said I still existed in someone else's plans. I placed a single card on the table, the one I had bought for myself, just in case. It sat unopened on the worn wood where I had once iced cakes and cut candles for everyone else. The kettle hissed, then went quiet. My phone stayed dark. I checked it anyway, turned it face down, then right side up again. Don't be dramatic, I told myself. People get busy. Still, the absence pressed in, heavier than I expected. Then a thought settled, unwelcome and precise. This silence doesn't feel accidental. And for the first time that morning, I wondered who had decided I no longer needed to be remembered. Longer pause. 8:03 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. The morning settled in without ceremony. I stayed at the kitchen table longer than I needed to, my hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone lukewarm. The clock above the sink ticked steadily, each second landing louder in the quiet. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past, tires hissing against the damp road. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. None of it paused to notice the small fracture opening inside my chest. It's just a birthday, I told myself again. But the words felt thin. This wasn't about cake or candles. It was about absence, about the silence where acknowledgment should have been. I walked slowly through the house, letting my fingers trail along the hallway wall. The floorboards dipped slightly in places worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Framed photographs lined the corridor, holidays, graduations, moments when I had once been central to the room. I paused at one picture in particular. Edward stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. At the time, I had felt secure, included. Family looks out for its own, I had believed. The memory felt fragile now, like paper left too long in the sun. Back in the kitchen, I opened the calendar again and traced the circle around today's date. I remembered noisy birthdays, voices overlapping, someone forgetting the candles, laughter spilling into rooms too small to hold it. I hadn't minded the quiet as I grew older. What unsettled me now was that the quiet felt chosen for me. Decided without asking. Since when did silence become my role? As the light shifted across the floor, a steady awareness replaced the ache. Whatever this was, it hadn't started today. Today had only revealed it. And somewhere beneath the stillness, I felt the first hint of something else taking shape. Not fear, but attention. Longer pause. 9:21 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. The past has a way of waiting patiently. I didn't sit down intending to revisit my life, but the quiet invited it. I settled into the armchair by the window, the one where the late morning light always lingered a little longer than elsewhere. And slowly, the years came back to me in layers. 25 years ago, I learned that grief doesn't pause responsibility. When my husband died, sympathy arrived in kind words, but bills arrived on schedule. I learned quickly how to ask questions without apologizing for them, how to read documents twice, how to trust the small tightening in my chest when numbers didn't line up. I worked steadily, saved carefully. Every choice was measured. Repairs before comforts, stability before indulgence. I wrote everything down, not from fear, but from respect for the life I was still living. Attention is a kind of care, I told myself. And so I paid attention to dates, to balances, to promises that needed keeping. Independence wasn't stubbornness. It was dignity practiced daily. Friends urged me to relax, to let someone else handle things. I smiled, thanked them, then kept my pen moving. I wasn't guarding money, I was guarding clarity. The house, the accounts, the routines, they stood because I stood with them. Over time, that steadiness became habit, and habit became identity. Edward entered my life later when the sharp edges of those years had softened. He was helpful at first, confident, reassuring, eager to make things easier. After so long carrying everything alone, it felt reasonable to share the weight. This is partnership, I thought. This is support. Looking back now, I can see how easily help can turn into direction when peace matters more than questioning. And how quietly a life you built can be mistaken for something ready to be managed. Longer pause. 10:04 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. Red flags rarely arrive waving. I didn't notice the change all at once. That was the unsettling part. Edward didn't become loud. He didn't become cruel. He didn't issue demands or raise his voice. Instead, his presence shifted in smaller ways. Quiet, almost considerate. He began finishing my sentences as if he already knew where I was going and wanted to save me the trouble of getting there myself. When the phone rang, he answered without looking at me. "Yes, that's already handled," he'd say, calm, confident. Handled by whom, I wondered later, and on whose authority? At the time, I brushed the thought aside. Don't be suspicious, I told myself. You've earned peace. He spoke about plans as if agreement were already implied. We'll do this next. That's taken care of. Always we, though the decisions no longer felt shared. His tone was gentle, reassuring, never sharp. And that, I realized much later, made it harder to challenge. Anger invites resistance. Calm assumes consent. I began to notice how he spoke about me to others. "Ruth gets tired easily," he'd say with a small, indulgent smile. Or, "She doesn't like dealing with details anymore." None of it was entirely false. but none of it was entirely his to say. Each comment nudged me slightly out of the center of my own life. One afternoon, I asked about a letter addressed jointly to us. He glanced at it once and slid it aside. "Just routine," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." The words lingered. Nothing you need to worry about. As if concern were no longer my right. Standing alone in the kitchen later, I felt it clearly for the first time. This wasn't help. It was positioning. And Edward seemed very certain I wouldn't notice. Pause. 11:19 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. The first betrayal waited to be discovered. I found it by accident. That's the part that still stays with me. The way something so important revealed itself without ceremony. The mail was stacked neatly on the dining table, sunlight spilling across envelopes the way it always did. Then I noticed one that felt different. Thicker paper, formal print, a return address I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly. The language inside was calm, deliberate, written to sound reassuring. Words like authorization and temporary authority sat comfortably on the page, as if they belonged there. My eyes moved downward, line by line, until they reached the signature block. My name was there, typed, not signed. I didn't feel panic. I felt recognition. That is not my signature. I had signed my name the same way for decades, slanted slightly, looping at the end. This version was rigid, impersonal, someone else's hand pretending to be mine. Edward walked in just then. He stopped when he saw the paper in my hands. Only for a moment, but long enough. "Oh," he said lightly, "you found that." Found. As if it had wandered into the house on its own. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "It's nothing permanent," he replied quickly, already stepping closer. "Just something to make things easier while we get organized." "You signed for me," I said. He sighed, impatience disguised as concern. "I didn't think you'd mind. It saves time." Saves time for whom, I wondered. "You didn't ask," I said quietly. "I didn't think I needed to." That sentence settled heavily between us. In that moment, I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the first line he crossed. 12:03 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. The second betrayal was deliberate. Edward didn't mention the document again. That silence told me more than any explanation could have. He moved through the house with an ease that felt newly earned, opening drawers, sorting papers, answering his phone in a tone that assumed authority. It was as if my discovery had already been absorbed into his plan, filed away as something inconvenient but manageable. I discovered the second betrayal that afternoon. I tried to log into my bank account. The screen refreshed once, then again. Finally, a simple message appeared. Access denied. I tried carefully entering the same password I had used for years. Nothing changed. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with alertness. Something had moved without me. When I called customer service, the woman on the line was polite. careful. There's been a recent change to your account permissions, she explained. Mr. Langley is now listed as the primary contact and authorized decision-maker. Primary. The word landed heavily. I thanked her and ended the call before she could continue. My hands rested on the desk, steady, unmoving. He hadn't just prepared paperwork. He had acted on it. When I asked Edward about it, he didn't deny it. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, as if this conversation had been overdue. It was necessary, he said. Things move faster when one person handles them. You've been under stress. Stress? You decided that for me? I asked. He hesitated. Just long enough. Then nodded. It's for your own good. That was when clarity arrived. Cold, clean, undeniable. This wasn't concern. It was replacement. And once I saw that, there was no unseeing it. Longer pause. 1:17 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. The third betrayal arrived disguised as kindness. I was sitting at the small writing desk near the window, pen resting loosely in my hand. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually feels earned. Then I heard Edward's voice in the hallway. He was on the phone, speaking softly, carefully. The tone he used when he wanted to sound responsible. At first I wasn't listening. This house is old, and privacy has always felt like a courtesy you extend without question. Then I heard my name. Ruth's been a little overwhelmed lately, he said gently. Nothing serious, just a lot on her plate. Overwhelmed. The word settled slowly like dust after movement. Not confused, not incapable, just enough uncertainty to sound reasonable. Useful. I stayed still, my pen hovering above the page as his voice continued. Calm, reassuring. I think it's best we document everything properly, he added. You know, just in case. She trusts me to handle things. She trusts me. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not panic, recognition. This wasn't about helping anymore. This was about preparing an explanation for my absence, one where I didn't need to be present to approve it. When the call ended, I stepped into the hallway. Edward looked up, surprised for half a second, then smoothed his expression. I was just about to check on you, he said. Who are you talking to? I asked. The attorney's office, he replied easily. Just preliminary matters. Nothing you need to worry about. There it was again. What kind of matters? I pressed. He smiled, patient, practiced. Your wishes, your condition. My condition. I nodded once, slowly. I see. He mistook my calm for acceptance. As he walked past me, already confident the ground beneath him was solid, I returned to my desk. I opened my leather notebook. I wrote the date carefully. Phone call. Attorney. Spoke for me. Framed concern as control. My hand didn't shake. And for the first time that day, I felt certain. 2:06 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. Aftermath doesn't announce itself. It settles. I didn't confront Edward after that. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood what words would do. Spoken too soon, they give people room to reshape them, to soften edges, to call certainty a misunderstanding. Silence, when chosen, creates space, and space lets patterns reveal themselves. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately. The hallway runner I stitched years ago lay straight beneath my feet. A framed photograph of my late husband rested on the staircase table, his smile steady, unchanged by time. Each object felt like a witness. Edward stayed busy that afternoon. Phone calls, emails, papers, shuffled with purpose. He wanted me calm, contained. I gave him that outwardly. Inside, I was organizing facts, not feelings. Dates, phrases, patterns. Truth prefers order. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the small metal box beneath it. Old statements, copies of deeds, letters with dates written neatly in the margins. I didn't remove anything. I only confirmed what I already knew. Nothing here had happened by accident. Back at my desk, I added one more line to the notebook. Attorney contact without consent, narrative forming. When Edward asked if I was all right, I said, "I'm fine." And this time, it was true. As evening approached and his car pulled out of the driveway, the house exhaled. The quiet felt purposeful. This isn't reaction, I realized. It's preparation. Pause. 3:41 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. Preparation has a rhythm. I waited until the house was quiet again before I made the call. Not out of fear, but out of respect for timing. There are moments when urgency muddies truth, and this wasn't one of them. I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity. Someone who understood records, not reassurance. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of paper and old wood polish. The kind of place where voices don't rush. I arrived early, my coat folded over my arm, my bag resting at my feet. When I sat down, my hands surprised me. They were steady. Good, I thought. Steady as honest. I placed the leather notebook on the desk between us. It made a soft sound when it landed, unremarkable, deliberate. I spoke in order. The birthday, the silence, the document with my name typed where my signature should have been, the calls made on my behalf, the language used about me instead of to me. Dates first, then phrases, then patterns. I didn't accuse. I observed, He listened without interrupting. When I slid the paper forward, he studied it carefully, then looked up. "You didn't sign this," he said. "No," I replied. The word didn't need anything added. We moved carefully after that. Requests for records, authorization trails, communication logs. He explained the process: plainly review, verification, disclosure. Each step felt solid because it didn't depend on emotion. It depended on proof. "This will change the balance," he said gently. "Once formal requests go out, control shifts." I nodded. I already felt it shifting. When I signed, my actual signature this time, the pen didn't hesitate. Some habits are preparation you don't recognize until you need them. "From here on," he said, "no conversations. Let the record speak." Outside, the late afternoon air felt clean. I took a deeper breath than I had in days. Preparation doesn't shout, I realized. It documents. Pause. Ones. 9:18 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. The moment the ground shifted. The call came the next morning, earlier than I expected. I was standing by the living room window, watching bare branches sway against a pale winter sky. When my phone rang, I let it ring once, just long enough to steady myself. Then I answered. "Mrs. Caldwell," the woman said, her voice careful, professional. "This is the estate review office. We've completed an initial assessment." I sat down slowly, the chair firm beneath me. This is the hinge, I thought. Not the end. Just the place where everything turns. She spoke with precision. There were inconsistencies. Drafts circulated without documented consent. Communications made on my behalf that excluded me entirely. My name appeared where it should not have been absent, and was absent where it should have been central. Each sentence felt like a quiet correction being issued into a room I hadn't been allowed to enter. "Effective immediately," she continued. "All discretionary authority previously exercised by Mr. Langley is suspended pending formal review." Suspended. The word settled into the house like dust, finally falling after a long disturbance. I thanked her and ended the call, my voice calm, almost distant. The silence that followed was different. Not empty, weighted, deliberate. I didn't have long to sit with it. Minutes later, my phone lit up again. Edward's name. I watched it glow, then fade. A moment passed. Then a message appeared. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." Too far. I repeated it silently, as if noticing were the offense. I set the phone face down on the table. "No conversations," my lawyer had said. "Let silence do its work." So I did. By late morning, an email arrived. One line. Clean. Unmistakable. He's been formally notified the meeting is scheduled. I closed my eyes and breathed out slowly. The story was no longer being told about me. Soon, it would be told in front of him. Pause and 11:02 a.m., Richmond, Virginia, when the truth entered the room. The conference room was smaller than I expected. Clean lines, neutral walls. A long table polished to a quiet shine. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in narrow bands, laying everything bare without being unkind. I arrived early, as I always did when something mattered. I sat down slowly, placing my handbag beside the chair, then rested my hands in my lap. They were steady. That surprised me. My lawyer arrived moments later, a thin folder tucked under his arm. Not thick, not dramatic. That felt intentional. Everything we need is here, he said softly, setting it on the table. Everything we need, not everything we feel. When Edward walked in, he didn't look at me at first. He greeted the room instead, polite nods, professional smiles, confidence worn carefully. Only then did he glance my way. His expression tightened just for a second, before smoothing over, as if this were still manageable. The attorney began calmly, outlining the purpose of the meeting. No accusations, just sequence, timeline, documentation. I focused on the grain of the table beneath my fingertips, grounding myself as the facts took shape. Then, my name was spoken. Not casually, not as an aside, formally, repeated, attached to documents and decisions that had been made without me. Each time it was said, it felt like a correction being issued aloud. Mrs. Caldwell did not authorize these changes, the attorney said evenly. Nor was she informed. Edward leaned forward. That's not entirely accurate, he said quickly. Ruth was aware. She preferred that I handle things. I lifted my eyes. I preferred to be asked, I said. My voice didn't waver, and I wasn't. Silence followed. Not awkward, decisive. My lawyer slid a document across the table. My handwriting, dated entries, consistent, deliberate. Proof that didn't respond to tone. In that moment, I understood something clearly. The truth doesn't argue. It waits until the room is ready to hear it. Pause. 2:27 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. when witnesses changed everything. The second meeting felt different before anyone spoke. The room was larger, the table longer, the chairs spaced with intention. 2 additional attorneys sat along one side, folders already open. A firm representative stood near the window, hands folded, watching everything. This was no longer a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. This was record. Edward arrived late. The door opened sharply, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. He paused just inside, eyes moving across the room, counting witnesses. I noticed the hesitation in his step, brief but real. Before he adjusted his posture and took his seat, he hadn't expected this many eyes. I remained seated, my coat folded neatly across my lap. My back was straight. My hands rested calmly together. Inside, my heart beat steadily. Not fast, not slow, just present. This is what it feels like, I thought, when you stop bracing. The lead attorney began without preamble. Her voice was calm, precise, unauthorized communications, patterned decision-making, exclusions that could not be justified by urgency or necessity. Each point landed cleanly, stripped of emotion. Facts don't need emphasis when they're documented. Then she turned toward me. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said evenly, "would you like to describe your experience?" I stood slowly. The chair slid back with a soft sound that felt louder than it was. I didn't look at Edward. I looked at the people who had asked me to speak. "I was not consulted," I said. "I was informed after decisions were already made. And when I asked questions, I was told it was for my own good." Edward shifted in his seat. "I kept records," I continued, placing my leather notebook on the table. It landed quietly. It didn't need to announce itself. Not because I distrusted anyone, but because attention has always been how I take care of my life. Edward spoke then, quickly. I was trying to protect her. The attorney met his gaze without hesitation. "Intent does not replace consent," she said. "And protection does not justify erasure." The room went still. And in that silence, I knew. Whatever came next, this part was no longer mine to carry alone. 4:56 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. Consequences don't announce themselves. The decision didn't come with raised voices. No dramatic pauses. No sharp words. It arrived calmly, carried by procedural language that left no room for interpretation. Authority previously exercised by Edward Langley was formally withdrawn. Drafts were nullified. Oversight reassigned. Safeguards established. The words were neutral, but the effect was final. Edward stared at the table as if it might explain itself to him. The confidence he once carried so easily had nowhere left to settle. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He gathered his papers more quickly than before. Movements, tight, controlled. And he left without looking back. I stayed seated after the room emptied, letting the quiet settle around me. Justice doesn't need applause, I thought. It needs alignment. And for the first time in weeks, things felt aligned again. The consequences unfolded slowly, not all at once, not loudly, not cruelly. Notices arrived, clean, precise, my name restored where it belonged, his removed where it no longer did. Meetings continued without him. Decisions moved forward without detours. No one called to explain. No one needed to. Weeks later, at a family gathering, we crossed paths. He nodded once, stiffly, then turned away. No apology, no accusation, just distance. And in that distance, I understood something important. The consequence wasn't humiliation. It was irrelevance. Control dissolves quietly when it's no longer assumed. That evening, I placed the leather notebook back into its drawer. I didn't linger. It had done what it was meant to do. Not as a weapon, but as a witness. Some people believe downfall requires confrontation. Sometimes it requires only patience, proof, and the quiet refusal to disappear. And when consequences finally arrive, they don't ask for forgiveness. They simply remain. Peswan. 6:12 p.m., Richmond, Virginia. Healing doesn't rush, it settles. That evening, the house felt different. Not quieter, calmer. As if something that had been pressing against the walls for weeks had finally stepped outside and closed the door behind it. I moved through the room slowly, turning on lamps one by one. Warm light filled corners that had felt sharp and watchful not long ago. My shoulders lowered without me asking them to. That's how I knew something had truly ended. In the kitchen, I made a simple meal. Soup simmered gently, the steady rhythm of the spoon against the pot grounding me in the present. Steam fogged my glasses. I laughed softly as I wiped them clean. The sound surprised me, not because it was loud, but because it was easy. I'm still here, I thought. Still capable. Still myself. I sat at the table alone, but the loneliness I had feared never arrived. Instead, there was space. Room to breathe without being managed, without waiting for permission. The drawer beside me remained closed, the leather notebook resting inside. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. What it carried had already done its work. The shame I had absorbed quietly. The subtle suggestions about age, about confusion, about needing someone else to decide for me, began to loosen its grip. Not because it was argued away, but because it no longer fit. Healing, I realized, doesn't erase what happened. It repositions it, places it where it belongs, so it no longer crowds the present. Later, I stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and distant traffic. A neighbor passed by and waved. I returned the gesture without thinking. The moment was ordinary and precious. No one there knew what had unfolded in meeting rooms and legal filings. And that was all right. Healing doesn't require an audience. Inside, I turned off the kitchen light and let the room settle into shadow. The house felt like mine again. Not because of documents, not because of decisions, but because I no longer felt the need to defend my place within it. Healing hadn't arrived with fanfare. It waited until I was ready to notice it. "7:36 a.m., Richmond, Virginia. Some mornings are earned." Morning arrived without urgency. No alarms. No expectations waiting at the door. Pale light slipped into the kitchen and rested on the table where so much of my life had quietly unfolded. I poured my coffee and stood there for a moment, listening. Not for footsteps, not for voices, but for myself. The house answered in familiar ways. The soft tick of the clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, the curtains shifting slightly with the breeze. Nothing asked anything of me. I sat down and wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle into my palms. Small details came back into focus. The faint scratch along the table's edge. The chair creaking just enough to remind me how long it had been here. The smell of coffee mixing with clean morning air. These were the things that had always mattered. They were still here. And so was I. For a long time, I believed dignity meant enduring quietly. That silence was the price you paid for peace. That asking questions made you difficult, ungrateful, inconvenient. I wore that belief carefully, like a coat passed down from another generation. But somewhere along the way, I learned something different. Silence only has power when it is chosen. When it becomes a tool, not a cage. I thought about how easily a voice can be misplaced. Not stolen, not shouted down, just quietly set aside. How often age is mistaken for absence. How systems depend on people stepping back politely, without ever being asked. I had nearly done that myself. Not because I was weak, but because I was accustomed to being reasonable. I opened the drawer and rested my fingers on the leather notebook one last time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some tools finish their work and deserve their rest. So do people. If there is one truth I will carry forward, it is this. Age does not make you invisible. Calm does not make you weak. And patience, when paired with truth, can undo even the quietest control. I turned off the light, picked up my coat, and stepped into the day. There was no audience, no applause, just the steady feeling of standing fully inside my own life again, carrying nothing but myself. And that, after everything, was enough.